come to our Media City program. And before I introduce our guests, which I think most of us know, I just want to make a couple of comments. One is that today is the day that the Lansing Parks and Recreation Activity Guide comes out. And this guide goes to the homes of people who participate in the Parks and Rec programs. But if you don't participate, you probably won't get one in the mail. So you can pick them up at the L&L food centers, and there's 4 of them, and you can pick them up at the Capital Community Credit Union, or you can call the Parks Department, which is 483-4277, and get put on the mailing list. But this is what lists all the programs and activities for both adults and kids, all kinds of classes and sports programs, and after-school programs. So it's a really handy guide. They've been putting it out for a number of years, but if you're not aware of it and would like to be, then be sure and pick one up and take a look at it. Of course, it lists the things that Turner Dodge is doing, as well as the community centers. And then there are 2 events coming up in September and November that I wanted to mention. One is on September 11th. We're having a recital of a lyric baritone named Gerald Blanchard, and he's going to be accompanied here in the music room on our grand piano by Ludmila Bandar. And afterwards we'll have dessert, and it'll be a really nice afternoon. I think it'll be Saturday, the September 11th at 2 o'clock, and it'll be $5 for a dessert afterwards. So it's just going to be a pleasant time. And then on November 12th and 13th, we are having a mystery dinner, which again will be produced by Ruth Armitage, and it's called The Sheik and the Queen of Denial. And it's 12th and 13th at 6 p.m. If you're interested, be sure and call us and make a reservation at the Turner Dodge House. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lucile, which in a way needs no introduction. But I just wanted to read something, Lucile, if you don't mind.
You go ahead.
Because this comes from when she was inducted into the Women's Hall of Fame, and I really liked what they said. And they also summarized a lot of things you're going to be talking about today. Lucile Belen has been the backbone and bellwether of Lansing since she was elected to the City Council in 1957. During her 39 years of continuous service, her forthright manner, courage, and compassion for people have made her a role model for hundreds of Lansing area women and men. While on the council, she served as president for 5 years, was chairperson of every standing committee, and was a key member of almost every ad hoc committee. She also participated in many of the intergovernmental boards, including the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission and the Capital Area Transit Authority. Lucile's governmental accomplishments have advanced the status of women in the local political arena and encouraged younger women to participate in the process. In addition to her public service activities, Lucile is a feminist, educator, fundraiser, philanthropist, entrepreneur, and a businesswoman.
Thank you. Well, I really was elected in 1955.
Ooh.
And then, but my term under the new charter started in 57. I was elected in 1955 from the 3rd Ward. At that time, the city had 8 wards. 2 aldermen from each ward. They called them aldermen then. 2 aldermen from each ward. And at the same time I was elected, these aldermen served 2 years. Same time I was elected, while they adopted a new charter. And the new charter became effective in 15 months. So my term of office for the first time was only 15 months. But the new charter provided the change it made in the city. They had a vote before the charter was started that they should not change the form of government. So the only major change they made was they divided the city into 4 wards instead of 8. And there were 1 councilman from each of the 4 wards. And then there were 4 at large. And under the first election of that new charter, the 2 people who were running at large that got the most votes served for 4 years, and the 2 that got the next amount of votes served for 2 years. Well, I had always served from a ward, and we sat around the table, my family and I, And we talked about it, we said, well, why don't you run at large, everybody knows us, we had the flower shop and everybody knew the flower shop, knew the name. So I ran at large, and I ran and Max Merningham ran at that time. And then Bob Brooks and Stan Peck, there were 4 people that survived the primary to run. And then in the election, I got the most votes and Max got the next votes. And Robert Brooks was 2 votes different than Max, so Max got 4 years. Bob never had a recount like they have now. So he served 2 years, and so did Mr. Peck. So that was a major change. Well, when I got on that, at that time, the council was meeting in the old city hall. And for those of you who don't remember, the old city hall faced on a Capitol and Ottawa. Just like this new one has part entrance there, but it was a gray sandstone building, real old. I remember when I first went in there, the steps to the 2nd floor where the council meeting was were so worn that they just had a little curve in them like you see sometimes. They'd been worn that much. Well, fortunately for me, when I was first elected, they had already decided to build the new city hall, which is where the city hall is now, and also the police building. And surprisingly, they had the cash for it. That doesn't happen very often today. And in front of where the city hall was being built was the old post office. I don't know if many of you remember that, but it was right on the corner there. And so they had to take that down, and they took that down and made the little I call it a patio in front of the city hall, but it's that area there, that's where the post office stood. Well, anyway, I was put on the committee that handled the building of the police station and the city hall. I didn't know much about building, but I sure learned a lot in a short time. I learned that you're very foolish if you approve change orders, because change orders are where the contractor makes his money. He's cut his corners on the bids so he gets a low bid, but he's always betting on change orders that'll make him the money. Well, so I learned quite a bit that way. And the old council and the new charter was still a weak mayor, strong council form of government. But in the boards, we had many boards at that time, just like we do now. But the boards had a lot more power than they have today. The boards, I remember one time the mayor found out who the new planning director was when he read it in the paper. The board had made the decision. And so things like that made me see that we really need to change that. And so as a result of that, we had a new charter adopted in 1960, I think it was 66. And at that time, some of the powers were taken away from the boards. They were not administrative anymore. They were advisory. They gave advice to the department. And the only boards that were administrative were the Board of Water and Light. And then, in order to get approval of the charter, they had to allow the police and fire boards to make a nomination of who should be the chief. And then the mayor could make that recommendation to the council and they'd be appointed. But they wanted to have their power of making the selection. So those were changes that occurred in the second one. I was on the planning committee a good bit of the time while I was on the council. I asked to be on the planning department because I thought the city needed a lot of planning. And I just make this, I go back to this, the first controversial matter that came up while I was on the council was the one-way streets. And at that time, they wanted to change Oakland to one-way and Saginaw to one-way. There was a lot of controversy in Walnut and Palming. There was a lot of controversy about that, but the point was that we had to really go along because it was the state highway department that wanted it, and the state highway department had the money. I remember one man that had been a hard worker for me in my campaigns. He lived on Walnut Street, and he was so angry when we made that approval. He would hardly talk to me. But 2 weeks after it had been in, he called me up and he said, Lucille, I made a mistake. I can at least back out of my driveway now. So there were some advantages. I think there are advantages. I think they're a lot safer than the others. Well, going from the two-way streets, I'll go back to the planning department. I was on a planning committee, and they had a committee that all the planning matters would go before the committee. And they would make a recommendation to the council. Now, if the council was going to change the planning board's recommendation, or if there were enough citizens within a 300-foot area that objected to the plan, you had to have 6 votes. Well, I remember, I'll tell you this story because the building still stands. When you go out East Kalamazoo Street, there's an apartment right across from 100 Park, and that's been there a long time, and that was just a dump hole before that. The planning board recommended that be rezoned for this apartment, but Mr. Kircher, the councilman, lived around the corner, and he didn't want it. So he got enough people that we had to have 6 votes to change it for these people to build the apartment. Well, I couldn't get 6 votes. I was chairman of the committee at that time because Mr. Powder went with Mr. Kircher, and he got one other person. I can't remember who that was. But anyway, all of a sudden, Mr. Kircher died very suddenly. So there was one less opposition. The new person would go along. And then finally, another councilman died, Mr. Powder, and they appointed Mary Black in that place. So then, there'd been a change in one ward councilman, so I had 6 votes then to change this. And I brought it out of committee then with a recommendation that they could build the apartment there. And that was just a dump before. People would dump things in and everything. And now it's a really good looking building. They've kept them up all these years, and it's been a good tax base for the city, which it wasn't before. And another place that the planning board, and they went along with the planning director, turned down was where the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Hall is out on South Logan. You know that, or I should say Martin Luther King, that was right beside a consumer's right-of-way, and right beside, on the other side, a bowling alley and everything like that. And they still said it should be residential. Well, I went to all the banks and asked them if they would give a mortgage for that piece of property for a house. None of the banks would give it. So but I still had to get 6 votes because they turned it down. And so it took me a long time, but within about 6 months, I got it out of the committee with affirmative votes so they could build that Plumbers Hall. Well, that's been years ago, and it's provided a lot of taxes for the city instead of just a vacant lot, because nobody would have built a house there next to a consumer's right-of-way. Starting in about 70, federal funds became available. We were able to get federal funds, and the first grants that came through were for urban renewal downtown. And those of you who lived in Lansing would remember that on East Michigan Avenue, starting in Washington, there were a lot of old abandoned buildings. And on North Washington, there were buildings that were not good. Well, we came up with a plan for what's there now. And it took us a long time to acquire all the properties. The last 2 properties we acquired one was the Detroit Hotel, the Countesses, and they were the last ones that sold. They sold to the city. Then there was one parcel left, the Broadway Lunch, and they wouldn't sell, so the city took them to court under a condemnation, and Mrs. Lewis carried all the way to the Supreme Court. We won, but she never picked up her check for the money, which was $55,000, and back that long ago, that was a lot of money. And shortly after that, the interest rates were running 10 and 12%. And one day, Judge Coleman called me and said, Lucille, can you get Mrs. Lewis to pick up that check? He said, it's just laying here. Well, I called her and I couldn't get her to do anything. I couldn't make her understand that she didn't own that property anymore. And she had two college graduate daughters who would not go and get that check. So the check finally sheeted to the state. And the state's got that money, so if they ever come forward now, they can probably go to the state and get it. But that $55,000 and figure the interest up to now, which is over 20 years, would be a lot of money. Well, anyway, it took us so long that by the time we got that property cleared, the first developers who had said they were gonna build these buildings were no longer interested. So we had to get busy and come up with some others, and there were a number of different programs, but nobody ever got the money together. And I remember once when Jerry Graves was mayor, he had a big groundbreaking there. He said Spiromart would go there. They were gonna build a shopping mall like you see in these European cities, and then offices and on top of then a hotel. Well, I knew it would never go, but I went to the groundbreaking, but I knew it would never go. I just had that feeling, a woman's intuition, you say. But I think I knew because the man that was gonna do a $26 million job only had one suit. He would come to all the meetings and wore one suit, and I figured if you were gonna do a $26 million job, you were gonna have more than one suit. Well, anyway, it didn't go, and so finally, we came up with this plan that we have now, and we had to, then by that time, the state of Michigan was not as prosperous as it had previously been. So a lot of insurance companies were not wanting to loan money to build the buildings. And we had the offer for the 1 Michigan Avenue building. The people were ready to build it, but they needed to get the funding. Well, we had to get a committee together, and I was president of the council at that time, and I got Ed Harden and a number of big business people in Lansing to be on the committee, and some of the union people. And finally, it got to the point where the unions went to the insurance companies in New York that were gonna fund this and said, if you don't fund this, just because you think Michigan is down, if you don't fund this, we will withdraw our pension money. So as a result of that, we pressured them. It's too bad to have to do that sort of thing, but we did. We got them to agree to finance the office building. So the office building went. Then we were faced with getting a hotel. We finally got the group that wanted to do a hotel there. But they also had to get financing, and we had a UDAG grant, which we could give grants in. UDAG was another form of federal money, and we had that UDAG grant. So we got that for the hotel, and we had acquired the land, and the agreement was that they buy the land from us, and they paid that land back over 10 years. But then the fortunate thing for us was that the Churchill Company, who was the underwriter for the whole program, got their financing through the Weyerhaeusen lumber people out in Seattle, Washington. Well, those people could take a tax write-off. You see, if they had this money invested. Well, anyway, I have to say this, the hotel is just now getting a 60% occupancy. And I get so angry every time I hear them talking about getting a new hotel here. It would be nice. But if you get a new hotel here, what will happen, the Radisson will just close up. Because they put money in all the time. And if we're not interested, and one of the reasons, I don't think people analyze this, one of the reasons that hotels like that don't go over big in Lansing, if you come to Lansing for a convention and you live in Detroit, you can drive home in an hour and a half, which takes you that long to go home from work. So you won't stay overnight. Or if you live in Mount Pleasant or Grand Rapids, you drive home. You don't pay the hotel bill. So that's what happens. We don't get the hotel occupancy that we should have. We get the meeting places and things like that, but not the occupancy. And so I just put that out because many people think, well, we should have another hotel in Lansing. Well, sure, it would be nice, but you just won't have it last if you don't have occupancy, and occupancy is the main thing. Well, then at the same time, we got the there was more federal money coming available. And we got federal money so that we could get the Lansing Community College property down on North Washington. And there was a big debate, they could get free property out in Holt. And I put quite a fight up, and I said, well, we'll get so much for you here in Lansing. And I talked to the council, and we went and agreed to get the land from Shiawassee down to Saginaw for them. And then they were able to get some money themselves to buy the other property. And the school system, which started LCC, gave them the library, or the old library in Old Central High School. So that helped them out. But we got that money through the federal government, through the redevelopment money. And we don't realize how much federal money we have had over the years. But one of the things we had to do when we got this LCC to stay in Lansing is we agreed to provide parking. And that's one thing that's always bothered me, is because the city has never done their share as far as the parking is concerned for LCC. Now, we had that surface lot over there on the corner of Shiawassee and Capitol, and we were ready to build a ramp there. But then in the senior citizen building beside it, Mr. Blair's mother lived. So he got all the people there to sign a petition that they didn't want the parking lot, the parking ramp. And the parking ramp would not have hurt them because it would have been open air and they didn't have air conditioning anyway. So we didn't build it. We couldn't get the votes together to build that ramp for them. And the city's never picked up that responsibility since. We really owe it to the community college to provide some adequate parking for them. Well, then at that time, after we had that kind of money, we did put in, you know, you read a lot about Old Town and about the fact that how much they've done, the city's putting money in. We put in quite a lot of money back then with the redevelopment money. And they refinished some of the fronts of the stores, and we were able to acquire that parcel of land in front of Branky Fish Ladder. So we put the parking lot back down there for them. And that other little park across the street, I think it's called Burkhart's or something. There's a small park there. That was all acquired through redevelopment money. Well, about that time then, there was some more federal money came available. There was a Model Cities programs that was available. That was available in the early 70s. And at that time, I'll go on just a little bit longer. At that time, we put our application in for Model Cities, but we were the last application to get in Washington. And I thought, we'll never get that. So my brother at that time was Deputy Postmaster General. So I called him and I said, can't you help us get that Model Cities? Well, he had that the year before. Mr. Weaver, who was a secretary of HEW, federal, had asked my brother to get his son a summer job in the post office. And my brother had done that. So he called Mr. Weaver, and Mr. Weaver moved accidentally our application got pushed to the top. So we were the last city to get my Model Cities grant. And one of the things that we got from Model Cities was this building right here. Model Cities was, the head of Model Cities in Lansing was Jackie Warren. She's now president of the Board of Education. But they started a historic district, and they started a health department, and then they acquired, through the historic district, thank you very much.
You're welcome, ma'am. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Well, they discovered then that we could get the Turner Dodge building, so we got that. And we didn't have a lot of money, but we got that. But before that, this building had been occupied by the Great Lakes Bible College, which is out there on the corner of Kreitz Road and Willow now. And they had, it was in bad shape, really bad shape. It was much better when you got here, Liz, but it was in bad shape then, and we got it, we improved it somewhat. But we didn't have too much money, but we did get it improved that much. And then we went to, we got the Women's Hall of Fame was a cooling home. And that was ready to be knocked down. And we were, but through this program, we got that building and we let them have it for $1. But Jerry Graves at that time was mayor and he wanted to level it right off. And I got enough votes. I knew how to count my votes, and I got enough votes to have the votes to keep that Women's Hall of Fame, and we loaned it to them for $1, or rented it for $1, leased it for $1 a year. And then they had to go on their own from that. We were able to help them a little bit. One thing going back to when I first got on the council, we had very few buildable lots left in the city of Lansing. So the planning director talked to me about that, how few there were left. So what we did at that time, the schools were bounded by the city limits, or were not bounded by the city limits, and some of these school areas were sending their kids into Lansing. Well, I got a committee together that kept the K-12 bill, which was the bill that provided kindergarten through 12th grade for children, regardless of the city boundaries or the township boundaries, we could say that you couldn't come to Lansing if you didn't live in Lansing. And so we kept that bottled up in committee, and I was able to do that through my mother because my mother had been in the legislature and knew many of these people who were still there. And so we kept that in the committee, and then we got the Board of Water and Light to say they would not extend water and light outside of the city limits. And so we got a couple of annexations that way. We got Groesbeck, and we got Maple Hill, what is it, Maple Grove or Maple Hill out there off of Logan Street. And we got some in the south end. And then the mayor changed, and we got a new mayor, and he didn't care anything about any of that. All he cared was getting elected. He'd been in the legislature, he could have done a lot for us over there, but he didn't do anything. And I thought, well, gee, if he doesn't want to do anything, why should I work that hard to get, keep this? So I didn't do anything, and K-12 went through that year. And so then they had no need to desire to come to Lansing because they could send their kids here whether they lived within Lansing or not. Mm-hmm. So there has been no more annexations since then, except a very few that if nobody lives in the area and the person that owns the area wants to annex to Lansing and we're willing to take them, we've gotten a few lots that way. And I'll tell you a little story about Frandor. Mr. Kircher was still on the commission when Frandor was built, and he was determined to get that into Lansing. So he hired some young man to go out in there and interview at that time, the people that lived in the area had to vote to come to Lansing, and we had to vote to take them. Well, he set somebody out there to interview those people and find out who would go vote to come to Lansing. So that's gerrymandered, part of the street comes this way, this way around Frandor, and that's all because of that gerrymandering. When they had the vote, there were 5 people that could voted. 3 of them voted to come to Lansing. 2 of them were renters and didn't care. So the Lansing people voted to take him, so we had that. He was determined to get those tax dollars for Lansing. And I think I'm almost over my time now.
You're fine.
But then the next thing that came along, when I talk about all this federal money, you'd be surprised at how much we've gotten, and we get back here. Then we got Economic Development Corporation, and that was created. We created our own Economic Development Corporation, and we had some startup money from the federal government. And as a result of that, the state legislature passed a tax abatement program so that we could abate taxes for people. And before we get started too much in the EDC, the tax abatement was there, and General Motors asked for a tax abatement. and we had to have 6 votes. We only had, and they were not gonna build, they were gonna move. They didn't have that much property, and they were gonna move, probably Helen remembers this back in about 70. So then I've never gone out to defeat any candidates on the council, but 2 of the people that voted against a tax abatement for General Motors was up for election that year. And we didn't have the 6 votes, so I just had to get rid of at least one of them. So I really went out and worked for it, and I got one of the men defeated. Or 2 of them, I got 2 defeated, so I got my 6 votes, and we did get that tax abatement for General Motors. Well, anyway, then tax abatement came along so that we could do a great many things with it. We created through economic development, we got people to stay in Lansing, to build buildings, we got EDS in Lansing and things like that. So that we had through the Economic Development Corporation, which was made up of, we had a council member and the mayor was on it, and then we had citizens and we were very fortunate and able to get business people that had knowledge about financing to serve on those committees. The same as at that time we had business people. General Motors always provided us with like the controller or somebody like that to serve on the Board of Water and Light. And we had bankers that would serve on the Board of Water and Light and all those people. So that we were able to have, I think one of the greatest things we have is the Board of Water and Light. And we should never let that get away from us. Because when you think of the difference in rates for electricity over what we have and what they have in other areas, it's a big difference. It would make a lot of difference over a period of years. Now the water system belongs to the city, and the Board of Water and Light administers it for us. And so then I mentioned that under the Economic Development Corporation, we got a number of buildings built downtown, straightened out, and improved, and we were able to create tax abatement districts to help them and to help the school system in places like that. When I mention that, when you think of it, Lansing has more properties off the tax roll for the state of Michigan, and for like the state of Michigan, then you take our schools and the churches, we really, a lot of our, I think it was, if it was figured out, it'd be almost a quarter of the land or a third that's off the tax roll. So that makes a big difference, and now in how they can operate today, they have a hard time. And that applies to schools. They wouldn't get any taxes on the state property because the state doesn't pay taxes either. So that makes a great difference that way. See what else I have on here. Most of you know that I did a lot to save the trees on the Capitol grounds. Well, they were going to build the parking lot all the way around the front, towards the front of the building. And I got upset about that. And one day I had come out of the Zana meeting at the city, on the second floor of the old hotel. And one of the senators I'd been working with, we'd been trying to get the state to build in Lansing and not to go out to the secondary complex, was standing at the elevator, and I said, well, Senator Lane, I hope you'll help me save those trees on the Capitol grounds. And he looked at me and he shook his head and he said, well, I'm gonna show you who's running Lansing. And I was the wrong person to say that to. I walked across the street to the city hall, and I was getting madder by the minute at what he said. So then I got there and I called the women, somebody that I knew at the Plymouth church, and those women said, oh yes, we'll help you. We'll go and put our arms around the trees if they want to cut them down. And so we arranged it. We had people there, so anytime a legislator came out of the building, we were there to say, you're going to save the trees, aren't you? And eventually they just dropped it. It got to the point where when they were gonna cut a tree down on the Capitol grounds because it was dead or something, they called me and told me. And then, Senator Cedarburg went to New York and he saw where they were built under the ground there in front of the Capitol building. And he thought, put underground offices, he said, Lucille, that won't hurt the trees at all. Well, I went out to the college and I talked to the horticulture department, forestry department, and they said, well, yes, you'll be cutting the roots and you'll be injuring the trees. And I told him that, and he just let it die. But I just think when you look at those trees in the spring and the fall, they are so beautiful. It would be a terrible thing to have that all hard surface.
Well, it makes our city look so much nicer.
Yes, it does, but
enhances
they
them.
didn't think about that. They were only thinking about parking close by themselves, you know. So,
I have a question. I was reading where you started an arts and cultural commission, and then that was operative for a while, and then I don't think it's operating anymore.
the what?
An arts and cultural commission?
Well, I was on the committee for the Arts Center,
Okay.
Arts Council.
Mhm.
That was a private citizens committee. And they called me and asked me if I'd serve, and I said yes. She said, you'll only have about 1 or 2 meetings a year. Well, we met every week for the first year to get that off the ground and get the money raised. Every week for the first year. It takes a lot of effort to put into things like that. Well then, I think I'm done. I've gone through up until about 1990, so I think that's long enough.
Okay, thank you very much.
Lucille, you talked about when you acquired the Model Cities federal funding. Do you remember the year? I probably shouldn't even know that.
I think it was about 70.
It was about 70. I figured it probably was about
I
70.
talked to Jackie Warren, she told me about 70, but she was working there in 80,
Uh-huh.
but I think it was about 70.
70.
I didn't want to go down
Does
to
that
a lot
sound
of
right, Liz?
researching. I could have done some researching at the city, but I didn't want to do that. I remembered most of this stuff.
Well, yeah, that sounds about right, because that's about when this whole thing
Mhm,
started.
it was
I
about
think.
1972 they started.
Yeah.
I think that's about right. I figured it out about that time. Who was mayor and everything.
You know, Lucille, I think very few of us have ever heard the behind the scenes antics that go on to get Lansing where it is today.
Well, it takes a lot of work to get things done, people to do things.
Well, it takes a spark plug too, who can sway other people.
And a person that has the foresight to look into the future.
That's right. Well, I was on the planning committee for most of the time. In fact, I'll tell you this story. One time I was out to the board. At that time, when you first went on the council, that was before the state adopted the new constitution. The board, they had a board of supervisors, which was before the board of commissioners. And the city of Lansing sent all the councilmen as their representatives, plus a city attorney and a city assessor. Both were our representatives out there. And I always felt pretty good about that. There were 42 men out there. And when I first got there, though, I don't think they knew much about what to do with me. Well, they put me on the most terrible committee, was retracted taxes or something like that. It never met. And so after about 6 months, I knew who the powers were on that board. And finally one day, one of them called to order flowers, and that's when I took him on. I said, well, listen, I said, you've got me on that committee, and I said, if you don't know anything better to do for me, just take me off, and I won't be on any committee. And so he thought for a minute. He said, well, would you like to be on the health committee? Well, that was right up my alley, and I said, oh, sure. Well, I was appointed to the health committee then, and I served on that committee until it became the health board, and then I had to take over. I was put on the health board too, and then we had a director who left, and his assistant left, and so I had to be the director for about 6 months. And I thought to myself one day when I was interviewing Dr. Risen, thought to myself, well, by God, she's pretty good, and I'm not going to let this man get away. So I put him in the car and I drove all around Lansing and showed him all the nice things, the good things about Lansing. And I said, we have a good economic base because we have the state capitol here, we have an Oldsmobile here, we have the college here, so we have, and we really do have a good economic base here. And so he took the job, and I was then relieved of my responsibility. But in the meantime, by then, I was on the board for Ingham Medical Hospital. We had some trouble with the Board of Commissioners with some of the doctors there, and so they made an agreement that the next appointment would have to be somebody from the Board of Supervisors. Well, I watched for the next appointment, and I went and I said, I'd like to be on that board. So I got put on that board, and I served for 20 years for that board and helped them build the hospital, the new hospital, or the hospital that they have now. And then, I'll tell you this one little story. I was on, one of the first committees I was on for the Board of Supervisors was a committee to see that the juvenile home for juveniles was just overflowing with kids. They didn't have any place for them. They were bunking 2 and 3 together. So we decided that we had to build a new one. And I was on that committee. And I was talking to one of the judges, and he said, well, he only need, if he had room for 8 kids, that would be enough. He said, I never had that many. And I said, are you sure? And I kept going after him. Oh yes, that was plenty. And how could I couldn't go and say, well, we're gonna build more than that. When he said 8 was enough, we built 8, and the first week it opened, he had it filled. And then it was overflowing in just no time at all. We just got it built. But those are enough stories about what I've done. I've enjoyed every bit of it, though.
Thank you very much.
If there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Well, I don't have a question, but I just have always admired Lucille. But I think, you know, Lucille and I have talked about her family and how, you know, her mother would help women get a job, and she was the first health nurse, and now my family wasn't like that. I mean, we didn't sit around the table like she describes, and her mother knew how to get things done, and you just grew up that way, you and your brother, did you?
Yes.
And I think this is a precious story. I just think it's wonderful.
Well, we always ate the evening meal together. We always sat around the table. Now today, kids get a hamburger here and somebody gets something else there, and they don't have the family unity that we had back then. We really had a family, united family. My dad.
And you were able to figure out things too, that whatever came up, you know, you talked it over and figured it out. I never had that, so I think it's great, and I hope all of you know that Marcy Murninghan wrote her biography, and you should read that, because Marcy was 14 years old when she knew you, or younger, I don't know.
I talked to her the other day.
Yeah. And so she knows, you know, Lucille and the family, and she wrote this biography. It's marvelous.
Where can you get a copy of it?
Well, where can you get a copy of it? Helen wants to know.
Well, I got one book yet. It's not a book, it's in the New England Journal of Public Policy. And it was the longest article they had up to that time. She had another article she sent me just recently.
Well, Marcy Murnham, you know, her father was mayor, if you remember, and
then the sister was murdered.
yes, and Marcy has a lot of things in there that you know, if anybody else that wrote it would not have the things in there that she had, because
She's a good writer.
yes, she is.
I never tell people those things. She got me to talk more than I talk.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be nice if you could just talk to us sometime about growing up in your family and all the different things that
You'd
your
like
family
that,
about.
would be nice.
I was telling Liz that I have a paper that I did for the Lansing Women's Club, on Lansing, a city for all ages. And it's really, I gave it about 15 years ago, and it's still up to date. You know, Lansing applies that way. And then we have a lot in this city. I think we have a lot that people don't appreciate what we have. We have as much cultural activity as they do have in cities much bigger than we have because of the closeness of MSU with us and what we have here. And then we have good health and programs, and we have the college, LCC, which is one of the outstanding colleges. And I don't think they toot their own horn enough, because after all, one time I had a young man at the counter in the flower shop, and he was sending flowers back to New Jersey or someplace. And I said, where are you, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I'm going to LCC. And I said, LCC, you've come here from there to go here? And he said, yes, you have the most outstanding photography course. He said, I went to Kodak people in Rochester, and they said that the best was Berkeley, California. But I tried them and they were full, and Rochester was full. And the next best thing they said was Lansing, Michigan.
Oh, my God.
And I don't think our people realize that.
It's got a very high rating as junior college, I believe.
Yes, I think so.
In the nation.
It's one of the best.
And they had this foreign tie-in with Japan. I think Dr. Gannon had a lot of vision when
Oh,
he started.
did.
And
He did.
I don't think he's ever gotten full credit for what he did, because he really had a lot of good things.
Well, something else about Lucille is too, she's helped so many women. Just ask Sandy DeGrew. I've heard that story, you know, Sandy was the secretary for the Transportation Authority, just a young girl, and then, let's see, I hope I have it right, the president,
The director
the director
left.
left, just on his own idea, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't.
He left and took another position
Any
somewhere.
reason, yeah. And so they had the Board of Trustees meeting,
And she was running it for 6 months.
yeah, and Sandy was running the business. And so they voted, or that is, they were about to vote that, well, we'll just put Sandy in temporary. And Lucille put her fist down and said, now listen, why don't we put her in as president or director, and then if it doesn't work out, we'll make a change. And then, is that right? Am I telling it right?
But pretty near.
Well,
Close enough. Close
well,
enough.
anyway, what I'm saying is she's, you know, stood up for another woman, and Lucille being a woman has stature, she's just established herself, and look what she's done for all of us.
Yeah. Well, we should have you come and speak in March.
I said,
That's my
what?
next opening is in March. You can come and speak then.
That'd be good.
Ms. Belen, did you have any difficulty when you first got on council with the men listening to you or getting, your word out?
Listen, the only time that I didn't have really much problem that way, because I guess I had enough force, but one time I was chairman of the committee that passed on the liquor licenses. And Jack Tar wanted to transfer. And they went to every man on the committee, and they never came to me. They kept talking about getting enough. And finally I said to one of those men, I said, you can tell them for me. I'm chairman of this committee, and if they want that out of the committee, they're gonna come and talk to me. And finally they did. But I think that they just went all the way around.
They knew what you stood for.
Didn't take them long, huh?
But the men I always felt one of the nicest things, I was on the Board of Supervisors, one of 42 as I told you. And there were 3 Democrats, and I was the only woman, and they still elected me chairman of the board. I always thought that was something that they felt good about.
Very good.